Good evening, friends. The operational situation at the front by the end of the 10th of May. Well, let's start with the border areas of the Kharkiv region, where by the end of the day we have positional fighting. But at the same time, there is a fairly high activity of enemy tactical aircraft and firing of barrel rocket artillery. Let's take a closer look at the 4 settlements that I wrote about in my telegram in the summary, so they are questionable. Well, let's take a little look at the situation now. So Streletsy Red, Dusty, and Borisovka. There are 4 settlements, 2 of them partially in the gray zone along Borisovka and Strelyash. Most likely, the presence of Russian troops remains in these settlements now. As for the red, they were present for the most part in the landing itself. We have a small landing. In principle, it covers everything, the entire settlement, everything is red, so they were in the northern part. And in the neighboring ones, of course. These are for the most part not assault, namely Drug. But as for Strelek and Borisovka, the presence of Russian troops was recorded. Whether it was possible to knock them out by the end of the day, there is no information. But there is other information, directly from the fighters, who wrote to me from the field that the second jerk, as he wrote. The second wave of attacks is being prepared at dawn. Most likely, as already reported, they will carry out offensive actions from Strelek and Borisovka in the direction of Lukinci Gluboko, and there have also been reports that there is a chance that they will shift a little to the west. That is, Zhuravlevka to Kudyevka, Hoptovka, Vysokaya, Yaruga. That is, there will also be a blow in this direction. But time will tell everything. In any case, that in fact is. So let's get out of the fighters. They see that there are some reserves tightened up, that is, let's say conditionally, somewhere in this area, yes, conditionally. That is, north of the border area of the gray zone. And accordingly, so far they are not going to the first line, they are not being pulled up, but given the information that is available. This is most likely to happen at night, since there is high activity on the part of the Apu drones. So most likely they will try to pull up at night and make a second breakthrough at dawn. At the same time, Reuters reported that in fact there will not be an offensive on Kharkiv, what we talked about. Well, let me express my opinion, that they will not go to Kharkiv, the border and so on. That is, the activity will be true. But the realtor said that actually there are attempts to create a so-called 10 kilometer to a depth of up to 10 kilometers. As the Russian side put it, a sanitary zone, that is, a sparsely populated demilitarized zone, which would reduce the number of artillery strikes of barrel rocket artillery on Belgorod, and in this case increase the pressure on Kharkov as a whole, that is in order to, let's say, draw off more forces, including artillery, yes, to this gray zone from the Afu. Therefore, there is such a moment voiced, and, in principle, if we take into account what plus or minus forces were voiced, they are concentrated. Now there are a lot of throw-ins and so on, including from our side, to inflated numbers are called. But in general, let's say there are no forces for a serious breakthrough. But as for the borderlands, yes, then naturally activity will be observed in the near future. Now, by the end of the day, we are observing positional fighting, and I repeat, if the red line was only fixed there in landing. It is Dusty in question, then Borisovka and Strelichi. The enemy was definitely present in these settlements. There are more throw-ins about Volchansk. Naturally, from Volchansk, footage was published just the same from the side of the fighters, including on the entrance from the Russian side to Volchansk, that is, from this area. At the same time, it was reported from the Russian side that it was possible to capture Ogurtsev and so on, but I repeat, there are a lot of stuffing going on right now. Time will tell, but as I told you, and I repeat, always be guided, if there is a lot of stuffing, on visual information. This is something that it will be impossible to refute. Therefore, positional fighting is continuing now. The enemy is also trying to consider what's what forces to use in which area, and where to make a second strike. And where, accordingly, the distracting nature of the blows. And in general, all actions in the Kharkiv direction are not distracting, but at the same time. Turning to the main section of the front, we state that with an increase in the activity of tactical aviation in the border areas of the Belgorod region, that is, strikes on the border areas of the Kharkiv region, the number of active sections of the front has decreased. This and hours of Yarskaya, slightly, but still a decrease in tactical aviation is recorded, including the Pokrov direction slightly, but decreased. There is such a moment. Therefore, the enemy now has a number of problems, because still, even I told you that although aerial bombs are some panaceas, yes, but you can also fight against them, bearing in mind with frontline air defense, if you work on aviation itself. But we are leaving this point, moving on to the main front. We proceed immediately to the Pokrovsky direction, where we continue active hostilities in the area of Arkhangelsk and Novoalexandrovka. Today, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that they managed to take control of Kalinov, but this happened more than a week ago. As you remember, a similar situation with ceramics. As I told you 2 days ago, they will stretch it all out because they managed to capture several settlements very quickly. And now they will stretch it all out in time, and, so to speak, they will give out victories in portions. There is such a moment, so the main military operations are now continuing in the area of Angelsky and Novoalexandrovka. If the enemy presses Novoarkhangelskaya in a northwesterly direction, that is, just the same, trying to approach the dam itself, the set point, and accordingly bypass the fortification located west of Arkhangelsk from the north. Because there is still the possibility of supplying it. It is clear that this is all infantry, these are small groups from the AFU involved in the area. But still they restrain the enemy in any case and do not allow him to develop what he is planning now. It is extremely important for him now. It turned out that during the storming of Novoalexandrovka, we talked in the north direction. There are attempts on one of the forest belts, now we state on two. And now we have a small square that is bothering them now, and they are aiming at it, but so far they have managed to stop them. Well, I repeat, so far the number of artillery strikes with aerial bombs has been reduced, slightly. But this has affected the activity and the advance of the enemy as a whole. Then we turn to the Kuman. By the end of the day, information was received from the Russian side today, well, somewhere a few hours ago, yes, we will say, that they completely managed to take control of Umanskaya, that is, to capture the remaining western part. But no visual confirmation of this information has yet been provided. What we saw was that, accordingly, the flag was installed, they installed their red banner in this area. And accordingly, the assault actions continued. But whether it was possible to advance, there is no statement from the APU that the enemy managed to advance. And there is also no visual confirmation from the enemy, although there were a lot of visual confirmations before. And even ran ahead with visual confirmations. That is, where the group lit up, it was shown, so it retreated, well, and as if the gray zone remained. Yes, we have closer to the area between Uman and Novotelova, Russian troops have already been lit up several times in this area. According to Tylov himself, the fights continue closer to the school without significant changes. According to the ledge south of Pervomaysky, a number of Russian military officers and sinters drew a few days ago. That this ledge was completely in red, well, fresh footage was published, and from the Russian side, where they strike at the likely positions of the AFU just along the forest belts. Therefore, we continue active hostilities. Naturally, the APU keeps the situation under control. I mean, so that the enemy does not surround, does not create a cauldron, well, here in principle. We do not have such large forces involved, but still active hostilities continue. And of course, the main task is to contain the enemy in this area now. Because the main goal is to subsequently take up positions at the Domaka beam in order to storm Severonevelskaya. Nevelskaya, we have already talked with you, this is a bone in the throat, which is very much hindering the Russian troops now. In fact, there is a huge field behind Nevelsky, and it makes it possible to bypass the north of the beam, north of Stavky. Makes it possible to hit just the same logistics of Krasnogorovka. We have a road going, and Russian troops were aimed at it. Because not only attacks were made on Nevelskoy, but also under Nevelskoye in the western direction. We drew the red zone with you. Therefore, this is a very important area, although even without that, if we are talking about Krasnogorovka, the fighting is not the best right now. I mean that the enemy still manages to gain a foothold in a number of areas. And now we turn to Krasnogorovka itself. It means that in the southern part, there were attempts to advance to a T-shaped interchange, the Apu set point. Including with the support of armored vehicles, the Apu left with a shock drone, the so-called Baba Yaga. Carried out drops on enemy positions and equipment, so we do not fix any changes in this segment, we have it in our hands. The gray area. As for the plant, again, there is no visual confirmation of what the enemy claimed, so the fighting continues. A gray zone was added a little bit, as you noticed, the line was shifted slightly in the northwest direction. Because there is contradictory information now. Active military operations continue in our country. At the same time, it should be noted that the enemy is pulling up forces on this site, that is, the Russian command, first of all, is pressing the northeast, and secondly, it is very seriously aimed at taking the plant. At the same time, there are distractions, and attempts to strike, and attempts to bypass the very residential district of Sunny, where the main building is, but taking into account the vector, so taking into account the frames that were published today. We can already say that they need to initially close the residential district of Sunny, yes. That is, from Persha Street Travnya and Nakimev in the direction of Geologichная Street, yes, conditionally. And from Geologichная Street in the same direction to move. No, we are not talking now, because, having pulled up some reserves, these forces are enough to storm Krasnogorovka from several directions. At the same time, the residential district of Sunny, yes, is no longer in the best position. So far, the situation remains complicated. We still have little information about Krasnogorovka, so the situation at a number of sites is being clarified. We said yesterday that there were attacks south of Nakimev Street. Today we state a similar situation. There are buildings, there are trenches, and enemy strikes were directed at these positions. On the part of the Apu, shots of strikes on buildings were published, so along Nakimev Street, its northern part. But attacks, of course, were made in the southern direction. Therefore, the situation in this area is being clarified, because there is no visual data, and actually, this is what new information attacks and battles in this area, so we are clarifying. And as for the plant, it also remains to be clarified, because there is no visual new data yet, not from our side. Not from the Russian side.